Hi there, and welcome to our church training video on abuse prevention. Everyone who teaches, helps, or cares for children, youth, or vulnerable persons under the auspices of Dryden Full Gospel Church is required to follow the guidelines and procedures as outlined in this material. As a church, we recognize that we are a reflection of God's love to those around us. It's our responsibility to minister to others with wisdom and compassion, protecting those in our care. We take our responsibility to provide a safe and nurturing environment for ministry and discipleship very seriously. This video will help you understand the need for abuse prevention, the definition of abuse, the protection practices and procedures we take to ensure the safety of vulnerable people, and the process for reporting incidents should they occur. These guidelines are therefore set forth to provide a safe and nurturing environment for everyone. They provide protection for those who are vulnerable, as well as accountability and safeguards that protect our ministry leaders and volunteers. We view ourselves as partners with parents and guardians seeking to provide quality care and instruction in our ministry to the whole family. Dryden Full Gospel Church has made a mandate to minister to individuals, families, adults, youth, and children. In that context, Dryden Full Gospel Church stresses the sanctity of human life and the importance and worth of each individual as a child of God. We live in a sinful and broken world. The disturbing and traumatic rise of abuse, both sexual and physical, of vulnerable persons has claimed the attention of our nation and society. Unfortunately, churches that have children's programs are not insulated from this alarming trend. In response, we are committed to providing abuse prevention practices of vulnerable individuals, including preschoolers, children, and youth attending any programs sponsored by Dryden Full Gospel Church. All churches in our fellowship, the Apostolic Church of Pentecost of Canada, are required to establish and regularly review our abuse prevention practices. We believe that childhood innocence is a gift given by God. Children are naturally trusting and readily place their faith in adults who care for them. It is our responsibility as a church to safeguard that trust. While we never want it to occur, we need to be honest and realistic. Incidents of molestation can occur in any church, including ours. Churches have traditionally accepted the services of anyone expressing interest in working as a volunteer with children or youth. Churches are by nature trusting and unsuspecting institutions. Asking sensitive questions of those who are giving their time and talent can be seen as distasteful by church leaders. No one wants to offend potential workers, especially longtime church members with a history of good service. These qualities can make a church susceptible to the incidents of child molestation. Such incidents often result in massive media attention, sometimes on a national scale. Television stations conduct live interviews from church property on evening news. Front page stories hit the local paper. Community residents begin to associate the church with the incident of molestation. But far more tragic is the emotional trauma to the victim and the victim's family, and the enormous potential legal liability the church faces. If a trial ensues, the issue stays alive in the media for months, sometimes even years. Much work has been done in the past few decades to help churches establish clear abuse prevention policies, training and procedures to ensure that those working with vulnerable people are properly vetted, qualified, and trusted before putting them in places of leadership or assisting with vulnerable people. We will explore our volunteer application process later on. In making sure Dryden Full Gospel Church is a safer place, we will be 1. Safeguarding children, youth, and vulnerable individuals of our church from abuse. 2, protecting the church staff and volunteers from potential allegations of sexual abuse. And 3, limiting the extent of legal risk and liability due to any such sexual abuse. Part of our job in fulfilling these obligations is to properly screen those who work with vulnerable people, which we'll be discussing in a moment. First, we're going to look at that process and then move on to understanding abuse, the definitions of abuse, and the symptoms of abuse. To protect our vulnerable persons and be protected from liability, the church must take reasonable action in screening and supervising volunteers involved in any work with vulnerable persons. By having everyone fill out the proper forms and keeping them on file, the church greatly reduces the potential for abuse and the resultant liability. The ministry volunteer application form or employee application form must be completed for all positions involving ministry with vulnerable persons. To protect the church from legal liability and for the protection of all workers, every prospective ministry leader, including established members of Dryden Full Gospel Church, must complete the application form. 3 personal references are requested on the application forms. References that are acceptable are limited to the following: a former pastor, a minor's parents for a minor, and they count as 1, a minor's teacher, other volunteer member who has sufficient strength of relationship to comment on the individual's personal habits and character, or an employer. At least 2 of these references will be contacted and asked to affirm the appointment of the volunteer. The person making the contacts, the date, and a summary of the references' comments will all be recorded. This will become part of the volunteer's placement file. An interview will be conducted, which will provide the ministry leaders with the opportunity to review the important items from the application form in a personal setting. This allows the ministry leaders to ask follow-up questions and to enhance their knowledge of the applicant. Each applicant who is approved past the application stage is required to provide a criminal record check. The applicant will be provided with a letter outlining their involvement in the ministry and the forms needed to provide to their applicable law enforcement agency. All records will be placed in their file and will be considered confidential. Any individual who will not submit to the procedure will be ineligible to be involved with vulnerable persons on behalf of the church. Minors are exempt from the criminal record check. Child abuse refers to an act committed by a parent, caregiver, or person in a position of trust, even though he or she may not care for the child on a daily basis, which is not accidental and which harms or threatens to harm a child's physical or mental health and or a child's welfare. Abuse is categorized as being physical, sexual, or emotional, involving neglect, harassment, improper touching, and improper discipline. Abuse of vulnerable adults is sometimes described as misuse of power and a violation of trust. Elder and vulnerable adult abuse can take place in the home, in other residential settings, or in the community. Physical abuse is the intentional use of force against a vulnerable person. It can cause physical pain, injury, or injury that may last a lifetime. This type of abuse includes pushing or shoving, hitting, slapping, or kicking, strangling or choking, pinching or punching, biting, burning, throwing an object at a child, and excessive or violent shaking. Sexual abuse happens when a person takes advantage of a vulnerable person for sexual purposes. It does not always involve physical contact with a child. For example, it could happen when an adult makes sexual comments to a child or secretly watches or films a child for sexual purposes. Sexual abuse of a child includes any sexual contact between an adult and a child under 16, any sexual contact with a child between the ages of 16 and 18 without consent, or any sexual contact that exploits a child under 18. Emotional abuse happens when a person uses words or actions to control, frighten, isolate, or take away a child's self-respect and sense of worth. Emotional abuse is sometimes called psychological abuse. It can include putting a child down or humiliating a child, constantly criticizing a child, constantly yelling at a child, threatening to harm a child or others, keeping a child from seeing their family or friends without good reason, or threatening to move a child out of their home. Neglect happens when a parent or a guardian fails to meet a vulnerable person's basic needs. Neglect can include not giving a child proper food or warm clothing, not providing a child with a safe and warm place to live, not making sure a child washes regularly, not providing enough health care or medicine, not paying attention to a child's emotional needs, not preventing physical harm, and not making sure a child is supervised properly. Types of sexual abuse that involve inappropriate touching include fondling, oral, genital, and anal penetration, intercourse, and forcible rape. Types of sexual abuse that do not involve inappropriate touching include verbal comments, pornographic videos, obscene phone calls, exhibitionism, and allowing children to witness sexual activity. Improper discipline includes use of physical discipline, shame, blame, or name-calling, and indefinite segregation. Appropriate disciplinary actions include redirecting to another activity, asking to sit in a different location, reminding of the rules and consequences, removal from the group briefly to provide quiet time, and contacting a parent or guardian. Church workers and staff should be alert to the physical signs of abuse as well as the behavioral and verbal signs that a victim may exhibit. Physical signs may include lacerations and bruises, nightmares, irritation, pain or injury to the genital area, difficulty with urination, discomfort when sitting, torn or bloodied underclothing, and venereal disease. Behavioral signs may include anxiety when approaching the church or nursery area, nervous or hostile behavior toward adults, sexual self-consciousness, acting out sexual behaviors, and withdrawal from church activities and friends. Verbal signs may include statements like, "I don't like so-and-so. So-and-so does things to me when we're alone. I don't like to be alone with so-and-so. So-and-so fooled around with me." Having reviewed the range of definitions of abuse and the symptoms of abuse, let's talk about the protection measures we have in place as a church. The following are procedures all of our ministry leaders and key volunteers need to be aware of when working with vulnerable persons. Supervision. Workers should always conduct themselves in a godly manner, being an example of obedience, respect, and honesty to those in their care. Programs that involve children and youth must always include adequate supervisory personnel. Supervision should also be maintained before and after the event until all children are in the custody of their parents or legal guardians. Our desire is to provide a safe, loving classroom where the child feels comfortable and learning can take place. Therefore, we use the following guidelines for all ministries involving children. 2 leaders. As a general rule, there is to be a minimum of 2 unrelated leaders in any room with children. Another alternative to the 2 adult rule is the open door policy. Open doors. When it is necessary that only 1 adult leader be in a room with children, the door of that room should remain open at all times, or have a window in place so that a ministry supervisor may look in occasionally without interrupting the teaching process. Supervisory staff. The supervisory staff should make regular visits to the classroom to make sure the class is properly staffed and supervised. Parental permission. Church staff or volunteer workers must obtain the consent of the child's parent or guardian before going out alone with that child, or spending time with the child in an unsupervised situation. Each child must have a consent form for Sunday school or youth group filled out by a parent or guardian in order to attend these programs. Children must also have parental permission for involvement in church-sponsored field trips or overnight events. Parents are responsible for signing in their children to Sunday school each week at our sign-in station. Affection. Appropriate touch is a key part of human contact, compassion, and nurture. However, volunteers need to be aware of and sensitive to what is appropriate and inappropriate physical contact. Differences in sexual development, cultural differences, family backgrounds, individual personalities, and special needs can factor in to what is appropriate for that individual person. Physical contact with children should be age and developmentally appropriate. Love and caring can be expressed by touch in several appropriate ways. Bending down to the child's eye level and speaking kindly, listening to him or her carefully, taking a child's hand and leading him or her to an activity, putting an arm around the shoulder of a child who needs quieting or comforting, taking both of the child's hands as you encourage them, patting a child on the head, hand, shoulder, or back to affirm them, holding a child by the shoulders or hand to keep their attention while you redirect the child's behavior, gently holding a child's chin to help them focus on what you are saying, holding a preschool child who is crying. When it comes to inappropriate touch, these are things that you must avoid. Kissing a child, coaxing a child to kiss you, extended hugging and tickling, touching a child in any area that would be covered by a bathing suit, carrying older children or having them sit on your lap, being alone with a child. These are things that we must make sure that we avoid. Washrooms. There are some general guidelines to keep in mind regarding washrooms. As a general rule, staff in a nursery will not be expected to change diapers. However, in the event that this becomes necessary, the following rules will apply. Diaper changing must always take place in such a way that another nursery worker can easily see the child that is being changed, as well as the other children and workers in the room. Children must be 12 years of age or older with appropriate training before being permitted to change an infant's diaper. A volunteer should escort an older child to the washroom and remain outside the washroom door and wait for the child before escorting him or her back to the classroom. The volunteer should call the child's name if they are taking longer than seems necessary. Never be alone with a child in an unsupervised washroom, and never go into a washroom cubicle with a child and shut the door. When preschool children need assistance in the washroom, an adult may enter the washroom cubicle to assist only when a second adult is within visual contact. Sick children. A child who is ill and could therefore expose other children and workers to illness should not be received into care. Some signs of illness are unusual fatigue or irritability, coughing, sneezing, runny nose and eyes, fever, vomiting, diarrhea, and inflamed mouth and throat. Any child with a known communicable disease should not be received into care. Emergencies. Dryden Full Gospel Church workers are not to give or apply any medication. If a child needs medicating, the parent must be the one to give it. No medication will be left in the classroom or with a worker, or child. In extreme cases, arrangements should be made with written instructions and the permission of the child's parents. Injuries involving blood. If a child is injured with a cut or other injuries that involve blood, separate them from the other children, isolate the area where the blood may have dropped on carpet, toys, etc. Apply first aid measures and send someone to locate the parents. If another child has had contact with any of the blood from the injury, avoid contact with the mouth, ears, and eyes. Any blood on the floor or toys or anything must be washed away using a solution of 1 part bleach to 10 parts water. These are the things that we do in order to help protect our children. These are some of the procedures and policies that we have in place to make sure that we are protecting those that we care for, as well as the ones that are doing the work. If you have any concerns regarding the safety of a child, you should report to your ministry leader and the lead pastor. The lead pastor will ensure that the proper processes are carried out. When an allegation of abuse occurs, document all of your efforts in handling the incident. Report the incident immediately to the lead pastor or his designate, who may in turn draw the church's lawyer if required. Do not try to handle this on your own. This process must be implemented as soon as possible after the allegation comes to light. In these matters, it is important to keep the information restricted to those who need to be advised. All suspicions of abuse should be directed only to the pastor of that department or lead pastor. It is the responsibility of the pastoral staff to take care of the necessary actions. Please do not share any of this information on social media or with other media sources. In the event that you are contacted by the media, you are to defer any questions to the church leadership for comment. Only the lead pastor is authorized to speak on behalf of the church to the media in the case of an alleged incident of abuse. If the lead pastor is part of the allegation, the responsibility of the media contact falls to the board chair. In conclusion, it is important that we take these measures to protect the vulnerable persons around us. We as a church and as individuals working with vulnerable persons are legally liable for any instances that may occur under our watch, and we are responsible to God for caring for these people. Part of our call as Christians is to be imitators of God and make disciples of all the earth. Taking responsibility for these people and the care necessary to protect them helps us to accomplish both of these things. Let's continue to do the right thing and be the light to the darkness while we're at it.